Hello everyone, welcome to the newest MS Translate Facebook Live video. Thank you for everyone who's already tuned in and started watching. I hope you appreciated the amazing special effects that I generated to let you all know that we were starting. That's just there so that we can start to get a few people in so that you don't all miss something. I start talking as soon as it goes live and everyone's trying to work out how to get into the live video. So welcome. I'm excited to talk to everyone today. It feels like it's been a little while, and obviously a lot's happened over the past month. Having been personally been in Europe to get to attend the ECTRIMS meeting that happened in Berlin, and I'm excited to be able to share those results with you and the research updates that I heard, I guess. For those of you who don't know who I am, maybe that's where I should start, because I know that we have a few new people who are going to be watching tonight. My name is Brett Drummond. I'm one of the co-founders of MS Translate. I have a background in multiple sclerosis research, but now spend most of my time talking to you guys about research and trying to break down the complexity of it and keep you up to date with what's going on in the multiple sclerosis research world, but in a way that's easy to understand. As many of you who might have been following MS Translate for many years know, every year we always talk about wanting to go to ECTRIMS, and for most years we haven't been able to, purely because of the cost associated with doing it. Is difficult to do, especially when we're largely unfunded for this work. But this year, thankfully, we're in a position where we're able to go. And I have to say, having now been, there is huge value in being able to be in the room. Because firstly, it means that you really get to choose what you hear about, and so I can base the types of research summaries that we can talk about on what I know you guys are interested in. But it also means that I can report back firsthand about all of the research that's being discussed, and we know how important that is, just to make sure that you're getting the most accurate information that you can be getting. So the format of tonight, what we're going to do, as with all of our Facebook Live videos, if you haven't watched one of them before, they're completely interactive. So as I'm going along and talking about things, if you do have questions about what I'm talking about or other questions that you may want to ask about multiple sclerosis research, all you have to do is type them in the comments box. I see them as they come up. I'll respond to them when I get a chance. So I have a number of topics that I want to talk about. We already have a few questions that have been submitted that I promise we will get to throughout the night as well. So essentially, we're going to get started. I'm going to start talking about the first topic, and I may lead to it with one of the first questions, but knowing that there's quite a few people already watching, welcome. Please ask your questions as we're going along. This is the part of what I do that I really enjoy, so I do want it to be as interactive as possible. So please do type your comments with any thoughts that you have. That's the whole point of doing these videos. Hi, Leanne. Thank you for joining us. I do have your questions down, so we will get to those shortly. In fact, why don't we start with one of those questions now? Leanne's question, let's start with this because it did generate quite a bit of discussion under the original post that went up yesterday. And it was talking about Epstein-Barr virus. So the question was, what's the update on Epstein-Barr virus research and treatment with antivirals? Going back to a story from a little while ago about someone who was treated to clear Epstein-Barr virus and saw improvements in MS. And I'm going to talk about a specific study that I'm aware of in that space, and you can tell me if it's not the one that you were thinking of. But then it followed up to sort of a more general question, which I think is important that we talk about as well. Talking about, a long time after, say, having glandular fever, which is what I assume we were talking about, would Epstein-Barr virus show up in your blood work, and can it be treated? So there's a number of key issues here to talk about. And so let's start with a bit of a general discussion about Epstein-Barr virus. And as I said, feel free to jump in with questions, comments at any point. If I'm not explaining things well enough, make sure you ask me to explain them better. If you do have further questions, please do ask them. So we've talked about Epstein-Barr virus quite a bit on MS Translate because it is something that has been for a long time linked to multiple sclerosis, or to potentially increasing the risk of developing multiple sclerosis. Now, Epstein-Barr virus is the virus that causes glandular fever. However, many people are infected with Epstein-Barr virus without ever developing glandular fever. In fact, the estimates that I've seen a while back now said that it was probably between 85 to 90% of the adult population has been infected with Epstein-Barr virus at some point in their lives. Now, the majority of those people would never have developed glandular fever, so you can be infected with this virus without ever knowing it. The other thing with this virus is that it very rarely gets completely cleared from the body. So once you're infected with Epstein-Barr virus, it does tend to hang around in the system, which is why 20 years later, you will still be EBV positive, or you will still see antibodies against Epstein-Barr virus show up in your blood work. So that answers the first bit of that question. In terms of can it be treated, I mean, there are antivirals that exist, but I guess because most people don't develop glandular fever, they don't know that they have this infection, so it's not something that happens regularly. And even once you've got to the stage of having glandular fever, there's not any real treatments that can impact on that. And as anyone who has had glandular fever would know, you tend to just have to wait it out, and it can be quite a debilitating infection. So the link to multiple sclerosis has always been that we've seen slightly higher levels of Epstein-Barr virus positive individuals in people with MS compared to the healthy population. Now, remember that we said that about 85 to 90%, possibly even slightly higher than that, of healthy adults have been infected with EBV. But the numbers in MS cohorts that they've looked at when they've done their studies have been higher than that, often around 95%. And actually at ECTRIMS, there was a study presented where they looked at a cohort where they showed 100% of people with MS had been infected with Epstein-Barr virus in this study. So there's always been that link there, but because it's so prevalent in the healthy population, it's really hard to know, how is this actually impacting on MS? And we've seen studies recently that have started to look into potential hypotheticals as to how they may be involved. And I will talk about one of those in a second that was presented at ECTRIMS, which was really interesting work. In terms of the study that I think you were talking about, Leanne, there was a study done in Queensland a few years ago now, roughly about 4 years ago, by Professor Michael Pender, who has been one of the leaders in Epstein-Barr virus research for a long time. And what they did was that they took T cells. Now, T cells are cells in the immune system that are good at fighting off viruses. What they did was they took them out of this individual and incubated them in a lab with the virus, parts of the virus. And the whole point in doing this was it made them hyperactivated, in a sense. It made them really effective at recognizing and destroying the virus. They then put those T cells back into this individual and were able to really effectively clear the virus from them. Now, as we said, this often doesn't happen. It often stays there chronically throughout your life. So by doing this, by taking them out, culturing them up, putting them back in, they were able to clear the virus. And what they saw was that after doing this, this had benefits for MS. So they did see improvements in things like walking and mobility, things like this. Now, in saying this, this is obviously really interesting, but this was done in a single individual. Okay, and I know I've talked at length before on MS Translate about how important sample size is in terms of doing this. Now, if there's studies as well where they've looked at trying to do this with antivirals and clear it, I assume it's a similar sort of mechanism that if you clear the virus, then potentially this can have benefits for multiple sclerosis. That's what this has suggested through these small studies that have been done. Leanne, yeah, certainly feel free to send me that study and I can have it. If it's different to the one I'm talking about, I'm happy to read it and I can put a summary up that includes some of this information as well on MS Translate over the coming little while. So that's sort of in terms of the picture, what we know about Epstein-Barr virus and some of the small anecdotal evidence that we've seen about how treating it might actually have an impact. In terms of how is this actually playing a role, how is it making people at risk of developing MS? There was a really interesting talk at ECTRIMS about this, and there was a whole topic on environmental risk factors, and that's a lot of the stuff that I want to talk about, especially as it relates to impacting on progression. But so this story looked at a concept called molecular mimicry. So molecular mimicry, and again, I think I've done an article on this on MS Translate before, is essentially the theory that in an autoimmune disease, for example, the immune system starts reacting against self because whatever the self that it's reacting against looks almost identical to something foreign. So be it a part of a virus, a part of a bacteria, something like that. And so this looked at this with Epstein-Barr virus and a protein in the body known as anoctamin 2. Anoctamin 2 is a calcium chloride channel in the body. What they found was that people who had antibodies against anoctamin 2, against this protein, had an increased risk of developing MS. And actually, if you had antibodies against Epstein-Barr virus, antibodies against anoctamin 2, so this protein, and carried the largest genetic risk susceptibility factor, the MHC molecule, your risk of developing MS was actually 15-fold higher. So that's quite a substantial increase in risk from any of these individual features. What they found as well was that the presence of these anoctamin 2 antibodies, these antibodies that seem to cross-react between the self protein and the Epstein-Barr virus antigen, the Epstein-Barr virus, was specific to MS. So they looked at a variety of other autoimmune diseases. So they looked at rheumatoid arthritis, for example, and they looked at a couple of others, and they didn't find these antibodies against this self protein in those. So it seemed that, one, these antibodies reacted against both the self protein and the Epstein-Barr virus, suggesting that the initial infection with the virus creates an immune response that then can react against self, and that this response seemed to be specific to multiple sclerosis. Again, this is early days, interesting research, but we're starting to see more and more how potentially this may play a role. So hopefully that answers the question a little bit. It ties in some exciting research that I saw at ECTRIMS that I did want to talk about as well. Yeah, so I mean, certainly send it through, Leanne. And we're, you know, in terms of treatments of infections, we've also seen some work using combination antibacterial treatments. Chlamydia pneumoniae is a bacteria that's been hypothesized as potentially playing a role in MS. There's been some studies that have suggested that this may be beneficial. I actually said last year that I thought, in 2017, that I thought infection was going to be one of the big areas of research in MS. Didn't happen so much this year, but I think it is starting to come a bit more this year. We've featured work on endogenous retroviruses before, and there's clinical trials going on at the moment about, maybe looking into that. So it is certainly a real area of interest. So, if you're watching, if you have any thoughts on the roles infections might play, if did you have glandular fever? Do you have any thoughts on this that you want to share? Please feel free to comment under the video, and we can talk about this a bit more as we go through. But hopefully that sort of gives a bit of an overview of the EBV story and how it relates to MS. But it is certainly something where things are continuing to come out. So, we can look to do some more written summaries about these as well if it's an area of interest. Following on from that, and this is separate to any of the questions that we have, but I will keep getting back to community questions that have already been submitted. But talking about environmental risk factors, one of the things that I thought was really important, and I was really pleased to hear, was looking at environmental risk factors and how they affect progression. Because often when we see research done on environmental risk factors, they're talking about what increases your risk of developing MS. Now, obviously, this is hugely important, but for me and for MS Translate, when we're talking to a community of people who have already developed MS, or largely will be people who already have MS, we don't necessarily want to focus too much on that. It's incredibly important research, don't get me wrong, but I know that you guys want to hear about things that are going to affect your lives. And so one of the biggest things, and it was a huge theme of the meeting on a variety of different levels, was talking about smoking. Now, I think one of the key messages to come out of the conference was we need to somehow raise awareness in the MS community about the problems associated with smoking. I think that the general consensus is that there's an awareness in the population that smoking increases your risk of developing MS. I think that's a message that's been out there for a while. And obviously everyone knows about the other health-associated risks with smoking. But there is now really definitive evidence about how smoking can worsen progression in people with MS. There was lots and lots of data presented about this. Not only does it increase your risk, but it does definitely worsen outcomes. People, when they compare people, even if you were smoking, once you're diagnosed, if you gave it up and then, a little while after being diagnosed, the outcomes improved. It's never too late to stop this to improve outcomes. So, that's something that I took away and said, okay, this is, we can be part of this. We can be sharing this message out there because it is really important. It is something that is, not necessarily easy to change. We understand that, if people who are smokers, it's not an easy thing to quit, but that we can be involved in that process in terms of starting to get the message out there. Really, it is something that can be done to really help yourself in terms of, how things progress. So that was another one. Let's get back to the questions that we had. So I'm just reading them up here. Do you know what the latest research is saying? So this was a question that came through from Christy. Do you know what the latest research is saying regarding the immune system of multiple sclerosis? Is the immune system overactive or is it weakened? So thank you, Christy, for the fantastic question. So what I can say to this is that excitingly, over the past couple of months, we did have quite a development in terms of our understanding of what is happening in the immune system in terms of multiple sclerosis. So we have known, I guess, for a little while, well, sorry, let me start even further back from that. Traditionally, MS was always thought of as a T-cell disease. So I've already talked about T cells as being one of these cells in the immune system. You don't need to focus too much on what they are unless anyone's interested. Feel free to ask if you want a better explanation as to what T cells are. But we've known that T cells are involved. But more recently, we've got the idea that B cells are involved. So B cell, get this right in a second. B cells are another cell type in the immune system that you may know of as cells that create antibodies. And so we've kind of got the impression that B cells must be playing a role in MS because we have seen positive results from new treatments that target B cells and deplete B cells. The main one that many people might have heard about being ocrelizumab or Ocrevus. And so we've had this idea that, okay, B cells are playing a role somehow, but we didn't really know how. And recent research out of Switzerland, from Zurich, from the group of Professor Roland Martin, has done some really stunning, elegant work to actually figure out how this piece of the jigsaw fits. And what they've been able to show is that these B cells are actually really important in turning those T cells on, in getting the T cells activated. It's the B cells at this early stage that is getting them to start getting activated. Now, there's more pieces to this puzzle, and I'm not actually going to talk about this in too much detail, because I can also tell you now that I actually sat down with Professor Roland Martin in Zurich while I was over there, and we had an extensive chat, and he also filmed a nice interview for MS Translate, quite a decent length interview, where he talked about this research, how they got around to doing it, what the results have shown, and what it might mean for people with MS, and what the future of that research is, where they're going to be going next. So that was, for me personally, hugely exciting to be able to sit down with one of the leaders of this really groundbreaking research, and even more excitingly, that we can bring that research to you, and that he was excited about the opportunity of getting to talk about this research. So that video interview will be coming up shortly on MS Translate, so definitely stay tuned to that, because it is really interesting, and as I said, this is really exciting, really new research. So in terms of that question, Christy, it's really that it's overactive. It's certainly, in the early stages anyway, we're getting increased inflammation, and we're getting a reaction against self that we don't want. What's causing that? That's still the million-dollar question. We don't know what that is yet, but you know, there is. It is an aberrant immune response. We are getting a response. It's not that we're missing a response. We are getting a response against central nervous system, the myelin sheath, that we don't want, and we're starting to get more information about how this is happening. So hopefully that answers your question. I don't think Christy was going to be able to watch with us live tonight, so when you do watch the video back, Christy, hopefully that helps. You can still comment under the video at any point when you watch it. We still get notified, so if you want some follow-up questions to that, just drop them down there when you're watching. All right, so for those of us, I can see numbers are continuing to increase in terms of our live viewers. For those of you who have just started watching, welcome. I'm here talking about research that I heard presented at ECTRIMS 2018. So for those of you who don't know, ECTRIMS is the big annual research meeting that's held in Europe to talk about everything that's going on in multiple sclerosis research. I was fortunate enough to attend this year, and I'm on here tonight to talk about all of that, but also to answer your questions. So if you do have any questions, whether you're just joining us or whether you've been listening and have questions on stuff that I've already said, all you have to do, drop those questions under the video in the comments box, and I'll be answering them. I'm here to have a conversation, so feel free drop any questions below that you want to do. While I have a chance to take a break, because I feel like I've been talking nonstop. Hi to Kathy, welcome. Kathy's always a fantastic contributor to MS Translate and these Facebook Live videos, so welcome, Kathy. Tony, I know, is also watching. Tony has been a long-term contributor to MS Translate, so welcome, Tony. Thank you for joining in. Adam, thank you for the comments on the artwork. I would like to say that it's mine, but it's not. We always do these Facebook Live videos here because of the lovely background. So, you know, it's the beauty and the beast. So that's why we do it here. So yeah, thank you to everyone that's watching at the moment. As I said, keep commenting, dropping some stuff underneath as we go through, and we will keep talking. So I'll get on to the next topic that I wanted to talk about. Well, actually, I'll continue on the environmental risk factor topic because there was a number of talks on this. And so I wanted to make sure that I shared as much of those as possible with you. And so the other one that I want to talk about now was one that we have featured in a post on MS Translate, and it led to a little bit of discussion, but I wanted to talk about it now so that if anyone has any questions on it, they can ask. And this was looking at a study. It was presented by Dr. Ellen Mowry from the US, from Johns Hopkins. Essentially, the main outcome of the study that they found was that people with an increased body mass index had increased levels of grey matter volume loss or increased brain volume loss. And we know that brain atrophy or brain volume loss is something that we need to be paying more attention to in multiple sclerosis. As we age, we all undergo some brain atrophy, some brain volume loss, but we know that the rates of that are higher. It happens faster in people living with multiple sclerosis. And so now, especially with treatments, new treatments that are coming out, we're really looking at ways that we can slow that process down. So this is interesting, but as I said in the post when I put it up, and as I sort of thought to myself while I was sitting in the audience of this talk, and unfortunately I didn't get a chance to ask the researchers the question because we ran out of time. I think what we need to think about in terms of that finding is, what does this actually mean and what does it relate to? So, you know, increased BMI is an interesting measure to look at, and it's an easy measure to look at as a starting point. But what actually might it relate to? And so two of the main things that we could think about that are big topics in MS research at the moment are diet and exercise. So obviously people having a healthier diet are more likely to have a decreased BMI or a more healthy BMI. And so we know that we've got evidence that suggests that a healthier diet and an anti-inflammatory diet has positive outcomes for people living with MS. So is what we're seeing here really just, it's not about the BMI itself, it's about the types of diet that people are having. And that's what we're seeing. Or is it about exercise? And people who are able to exercise more and include exercise as part of their MS management plan would likely have a decreased BMI. And there's plenty of evidence now that suggests that exercise can have a neuroprotective effect. And we've done written summaries on this before where we've talked about this. So is it, you know, yes, we see it in terms of the BMI, but is it just that it's actually a result of exercise, that we're seeing people who exercise more and therefore have a decreased BMI are getting that neuroprotection and so are having reduced grey matter volume loss? Or the flip side being people who are unable to exercise as much have an increased BMI and they don't get that neuroprotection, and so that's leading to the increased brain volume loss. So I think that it's important when we see results like this that we take them as exciting. We're seeing the link, especially when it's in terms of things that are this sort of lifestyle related findings, because we know that these are important to the MS community because they're things that they may have some control over. But we need to think about what is actually going on. So, you know, BMI, but diet, exercise, how does this all fit together? How do we tease apart these findings so that we can work out exactly what's happening? You know, that's really important. So that was just another study in there that was interesting, and I think we'll have some interesting follow-ups, but trying to work out exactly what's going on and what factor is the important factor, I guess, is the next steps for me in terms of that. So that was another one in environmental. The last one that I want to talk about, because it's then going to lead to my next topic, was about a high salt diet. Now, high salt diets, I also saw after ECTRIMS that they were getting a little bit of coverage in mainstream media online, especially in terms of, you know, can large amounts of salt cause MS? The talks that we heard at ECTRIMS essentially said that the jury is out on this at the moment. The data is not conclusive one way or the other. However, what I think one of the interesting points that was made was actually in terms of the fact that high salt diet, in animal models anyway, what they saw was that a high salt diet could have an effect on the gut microbiome. And on the gut microbiome, in a way, it shifted that microbiome. Interestingly, they were able to reverse that shift using probiotics. And so this is a very new area. It's certainly not definitive yet in terms of what it means, but in terms of high salt diets, I think that could be an interesting area to look into in terms of what is the potential link between lots of salt in the diet and MS, and maybe it is due to some effect on the gut microbiome. Which leads me to talking about the gut microbiome. See, that was seamless. It's almost like I've done this before. So the gut microbiome, again, I know that you guys are hugely interested in the gut microbiome as a topic, and we've talked about it lots before, and we will continue to talk about it. And again, really pleasingly, at ECTRIMS, I was able to have a chat with Professor Helen Tremlett from the University of British Columbia. And that video, that interview, has already appeared on the MS Translate Facebook page. If you didn't get a chance to watch it, make sure you go back and find it and watch it. It's also on our YouTube channel. I can drop the link to that under this video in a second. I'll do that as I continue on. I'm going to multitask. But so they're really, her research team at the University of British Columbia is hugely focused on trying to understand the role of the gut microbiome in multiple sclerosis. Specifically, what they're doing is looking at pediatric multiple sclerosis. And so to do this, and I won't give too much away again because the interview talks about it all in depth, is look at sequencing the microbiome from poop, as Helen put it, looking at stool samples from kids with MS versus kids without MS, and trying to see what the difference is in the makeup of the bacteria and the other microbes that are present in these samples, as a way of getting an understanding as to what's going on. It's obviously a really interesting area of research, as Helen says in the video, which hopefully everyone goes and watches, because she will say it far better than I do. But when asked, you know, what do we know so far about the role of the gut microbiome, her answer, at this stage, not a lot. That they were presenting at ECTRIMS, her team were also presenting a review of all of the current literature around that topic, and it's still a very early research. It's still a very early area of research, but it is continuing to grow. So I do suggest certainly having a watch of that video because it is really interesting. It's really exciting research to hear about. So listen to how Helen describes their work, why they were interested in what they're currently doing, and what the potential outcomes are. You know, as I think she said, and we framed it, you know, the idea of potentially being able to somehow alter the gut microbiome as a way of treating multiple sclerosis is quite exciting. We're a little way off that, but you know, the potential to be able to do that is exciting. On the topic of the gut microbiome as well, we also recently featured a paper that has been published, which also came from Professor Roland Martin's group in Zurich. Again, I talked to the lead author of that study while I was there, and we're looking to do a interview with them in the near future as well, so that they can update us on that research and all the findings of that. So the important message is that this is research that's happening, it's research that's exciting, and because we know that it's research that you guys are really interested in, we are putting ourselves out there and we're trying to talk to as many of the researchers possible that are doing this work so that we can present it to you straight from them, directly from them. So that's exciting. Look forward to those interviews in the near future as well. All right. I feel like I'm flying through these. How's everyone feeling? Just as a quick break for everyone that's watching at the moment, how are you all feeling? How is your Tuesday night treating you? Are we enjoying the video so far? Feel free to just drop me a line. Let me know how it's all going. Tell me if I'm talking too fast. Tell me topics that you want me to talk about. Comment on the artwork if you also want to comment on that, like Adam did. But certainly, you know, let me know how things are going. Feel free to drop me a line so that we can chat. Welcome to Multiple Sclerosis Auckland, who have joined as well. So everyone who's watching, shout out to Multiple Sclerosis Auckland, our friends from across the ditch. They're doing some fantastic work as well. They've been huge supporters of MS Translate for a long time, so make sure that you do as well. Get across to their Facebook page, have a look at their content because they're doing some great work as well. So welcome to MS Auckland, who have asked a question. So considering they're 2 hours ahead of us and it's 9:15 at night there, let's answer that question. Just so because we know that our New Zealand friends, it will be getting a little bit late for them. So any update on MS fatigue? This is often described to us as one of the most debilitating symptoms. So really good question and really important question. So let me answer this in a couple of different ways. One of the things that I thought was a really positive thing at the conference was, while there was a lot of talks about current treatments that are available, new treatments that might be on the horizon in terms of, you know, dealing with the autoimmune response, there seemed to be a shift in awareness about, as well as all of this, we need to be finding symptom-specific treatments or ways to manage symptoms. Because while it's fantastic that we are getting better at being able to stop the autoimmune response, and some of the new treatments that we have are great at doing that, we need things that are going to improve quality of life for people living with MS now. And the two biggest symptoms that I think that they talked about in terms of this were fatigue, as you mentioned, and mental health, in particular depression. So in terms of what there is to do this, yes, there was talks about it. I would say it's still very much in an early phase. We are still very much looking into different things that may be able to do this. But I think the important thing is that it is something that people are starting to focus on. That we're going, okay, we need people specifically working on how do we deal with these symptoms, these most debilitating symptoms. And you're completely correct. We hear exactly the same thing, that it is pretty much the most common symptom and the most debilitating symptom that people with MS experience. Excitingly, again, I get to this, I feel like every couple of minutes I'm giving a new exciting announcement. Excitingly, again, at ECTRIMS, I managed to get some time with Dr. Anthony Feinstein, who was talking about these specific things. He did talk a little bit about fatigue, but talked in particular about coming up with ways of being able to manage and treat depression. So he was looking at a number of studies which included things like exercise, included things like cognitive behavioral therapy, using computers, cannabis. So a range of different things, all designed to target these symptoms. So symptom specific rather than necessarily disease specific. And so that interview, again, I won't give too much away, but that will be coming up on MS Translate shortly. So make sure that you stay tuned for that. I guess the other one that we featured before, and this wasn't at ECTRIMS, but the other one that we featured before in terms of MS fatigue is MitoQ. We did the feature week with MitoQ a while ago. I do know that they've progressed into starting to design and look into doing a clinical trial for MitoQ in MS, teamed with a group in Portland, in Oregon, at Oregon Health and Science University, to conduct that clinical trial. It'll be obviously a very early phase clinical trial to start. That's exciting because we know that we have a lot of anecdotal evidence for people living with MS and other neurological conditions that MitoQ can have a significant effect on fatigue. We need clinical trials to really be able to assess whether this is the case, but that is happening. So that's probably the other thing in the area. What I will say about all of these as well, just while I take the opportunity, ECTRIMS was an incredibly busy meeting. So oftentimes there were 6 or 7 or 8 simultaneous sessions going on throughout the day. So often from 8 in the morning through till 7 or 8 at night. And so it was just impossible to actually attend every talk. Here is the book of all of the presentations and all of the posters. So as you can see, there was a lot of them. ECTRIMS 2018, there you go, there's the final program. So there was lots of presentations and lots of posters that I didn't get a chance to hear or to see. I am in the process of going through that book and going through all of the different materials that are available for it. So I will continue to provide updates on the research. At the moment, I can only talk about the ones that I was actually able to be present in person, but present in person. The only ones that I was actually sat in on, but we will continue to provide coverage as I continue to go through all of those presentations. So hopefully that answers the question. Thank you for asking it. Let's get to another one that kind of flowed on from one that we were doing before, and ties in a little bit in terms of this. And there was another question from Christy saying, is there any proof that any specific diet is beneficial to MS? Now this is it's a difficult question to answer, because I think you would find conflicting viewpoints depending on who you asked. And it probably depends on what you classify as proof, and things like that. What I would say is that we now do have quite a bit of evidence that suggests that dietary modifications can be beneficial to people living with MS. There are obviously a number of different diets around at the moment, and we've featured research from a couple of different ones. One using the OMS protocol and with Professor George Jelinek from the Neuroepidemiology Unit at the University of Melbourne, and the Wiles protocol from Dr. Terry Wiles from the University of Iowa. Now, there are probably some similarities, and lots of people in our community I know follow one of these protocols or other ones, or definitely use diet as a way of helping manage their MS. Sorry, this bit of hair, all I can see is this bit of hair falling down in my face. Use diet, so feel free to join in this conversation if you are one of those people, and add your thoughts and your experiences to it. But there is certainly, in all of these different protocols that are talked about, there does seem to be overlap and commonalities between them, and probably one of the major things is that it's using foods that are anti-inflammatory. So obviously, if we can decrease the inflammation that's occurring in MS and using diet as a way to do that, then that could have beneficial outcomes. In terms of, is there one specific diet that works? This is sort of partly my opinion, partly based on discussions that we've had with people, both researchers and the community, is that diet seems to be a lot like any other treatment that we talk about for MS. Certain ones work for certain people, and we're probably not at the point yet where we can predict what works for what person. In terms of, is one better than another? Again, I don't think we're at a point where we can say that yet. We don't have those sort of comparison studies. But in our interview with Dr. Terry Wiles, which again, I can drop the link to that under this video, she did talk about she's going forward and doing a trial on comparing her diet with another diet to see whether or not there is a difference in terms of how they compare. So yeah, hopefully that answers that question a little bit. Again, I think Christy's not going to be joining us live tonight, so when you do watch it back, Christy, if you do have any more questions, again, feel free to drop that under here. So I'm just dropping parts 1 and part 2 of those video links under here, so that people, if you didn't get a chance to watch that interview with Dr. Wiles, please do go back and watch it, because it was a good interview, and covered a lot of things that we know people are interested in. So there's part 1, and there's part 2. Hopefully the links to those come up. Press enter again. So thanks, Tara. Tara, I follow. So Tara, for watching, has just said, I follow OMS. Haven't had a relapse in 7 years. Lesions have either disappeared or shrunk. Well, it's fantastic news. Really glad to hear that. And you aren't alone. I mean, we do have lots of evidence of people who are using dietary modifications and are seeing benefits from it. Did she say what diet she's comparing hers to? She did. It's in the video, so watch it back to be sure. I have a feeling she said the swank diet. It was a little while ago now. I've been absolutely inundated with MS research news over the past month, as you can imagine. So the answer is not 100% clear in my head. It's in the video. I think it was that, but yeah, the answer is there. It's in those links. So just go back and have a watch of that, and that will answer that question. To answer your other question, Tara, is there any cure on the horizon? I'm going to answer this like I always answer this question. No and yes. And what I mean by that is, in terms of a cure like we traditionally think about it, it's not going to be in the very near future. I think it's the reality now. Things can change really quickly, just like we've seen with our understanding of B cells. You know, this has come about. We didn't expect that we would know this, and now we have a really clear idea of what's happening. So, you know, I say this hoping to be proved wrong, but at the moment we're still really unclear what the cause is of MS, and it's really hard to foresee being able to cure something until you know what's causing it. So, in terms of that, you know, I think that it's difficult. But if we think about cure in a slightly different way, and I wrote an article about this on MS Translate a couple of months ago now, and I'll drop the link underneath the video. If we think about a cure as being slightly different, And that's in effectively being able to manage the disease to a point where it's not having any impact. So it's what I call the cure. Are we close to that? Potentially. So we think about this, I think about this as being three different factors that all have to come together. One of those factors is that we have to be able to stop new damage from occurring. We have to be able to stop the attack. And that's where the current therapies work. So all of the current therapies work to dampen down the immune system or stop parts of the immune system, suppress parts of the immune system, so that this attack can't happen, to stop new damage from occurring. That's why we have outcomes of clinical trials of things like relapse rates or lesion counts or things like this. It's to stop new damage from occurring. And those treatments, those new treatments that we have in that sphere are pretty good. They're pretty powerful. Now, obviously, they don't work for everyone. Not everyone sees benefit, but generally, we now have a lot of options, and mostly someone will find something that works to a degree. So we're getting, that sphere is quite good. The problem is that none of those treatments work to repair any of the existing damage. So while they might be stopping new damage from occurring, there's all of this stuff that's already happened that's causing a lot of problems. And the damage is what's causing a lot of the symptoms. Nerve signals aren't traveling as effectively throughout the body because the insulating sheath around those nerves has been damaged. So we need to, if we're really thinking about doing something here, we need to stop new attacks, but we also need to combine that with a way of being able to repair the damage that's there. Now that's where myelin repair comes in. And myelin repair is a really new, exciting area of research that's gaining a lot of momentum. And there were, again, talks on it at ECTRIMS. And when we've talked to people before, and we've had talk with Dr. Travis Stiles, who's the CEO of Novaron Bioscience from San Diego in California. He's talked about this. He works in this area. He's researching this area. And his estimate was that he thought we might start to see the first myelin repair treatment available within sort of 5 to 6 years. So, it's not soon, but it's also not, we're not talking 50 years down the track. So if they become available, then we can stop the damage. We can repair damage that exists. That combined with what we're learning about lifestyle modifications in terms of diet and exercise, how do we create the best environment in the body to also minimize what's happening in terms of multiple sclerosis? How do we lower the inflammation in the body with things like diet? How do we increase our neuroprotection through things like exercise? All of those three things combined, if we can combine all of those and find the right treatment, the right repair therapy, and the right diet exercise balance to help people, is that starting to get close to a cure? What are your thoughts? I'm happy to take feedback on that. That's purely my opinion. It was an opinion article that I wrote in terms of that sort of stuff, but that's where I can foresee us going. And I think that's, when we talk about a cure, that's really what I'm foreseeing as being, that's my hope for the near future. Now, obviously we hope that we find a cure. We work out what the cause is, we find a cure. But, I think this, in terms of where I'm looking at things, is what I think we might be able to achieve in the nearer future. All right, I'm just posting the link to that article. So if you want to read it, I've written about that subject before. So if you want to read, if I'm not making sense with the things that I'm saying, you can read it as well. Just going to post that underneath. So you'll be able to see that shortly. Feel free to have a read of that and let me know what you think. Let me know what your thoughts are on that. So that link to that article is now there, so you can have a look at that as well. While we're talking about myelin repair, again, more exciting news. Again at ECTRIMS, I had the pleasure of having quite an extended chat with Dr. Ari Green from the University of California, San Francisco, who again is one of the leaders in terms of myelin repair and trying to find ways to repair the damage that exists in multiple sclerosis. That interview again will be coming to MS Translate in the near future. He really talked about all the work that they're doing, how this is going to work, and what the potential outcomes are. You may know Dr. Green from previous work that we've featured. He was one of the leaders of the study a couple of years ago that looked at a compound derived from an antihistamine that they found could have some myelin repair potential in multiple sclerosis. So he was doing that study. He talks a little bit about that study in the interview, as well as what they're now working on and what the future is for that field. So that was, again, really exciting. Certainly once that interview comes up, stay tuned, because I think you'll find it really interesting. I agree, Sarah. This is, for me, I think this is a really promising area of research. I think that's what we should be aiming for, is getting all of these different factors to combine together, potentially then with some of these other symptom treatments that we're talking about, as a way of really effectively managing multiple sclerosis to the point where, it's what multiple sclerosis. I think that's what we need. It's hugely effective management. That's what I think the cure is that we're coming towards. In terms of an actual cure, who knows? We have to wait and see on that. All right. How was that? Did that make sense? Hopefully that made sense. In terms of, questions, so just a few more questions coming through. So I will take the question about stem cells, then I'll come back to your question about Ocrevus, Leanne, because there's some stuff that leads into another topic that I want to talk about. So just while we're talking about myelin repair, I'm going to talk about this a little bit. So got to keep hydrated, got to make sure I don't lose my voice. Like almost happened 5 minutes into the last Facebook Live video that I did. So multiple sclerosis Auckland asking about what about stem cell treatment, and Tony's asked any news from Tish. So both excellent questions, both really important. So in terms of stem cell treatment, now let's break this down, because as the talk I gave in Auckland a couple of years ago emphasized, we need to be really careful about how we talk about stem cell treatment to make sure that we're not using a one-size-fits-all approach to this. And considering there's two questions on this, let's make sure that we're really specific in terms of what we're talking about. So stem cell treatment in terms of AHSCT, or autologous hematopoietic stem cell transplant, stem cell transfer. For those of you who might be watching who aren't aware of what this is a new treatment for MS, or it's not really a new treatment, but it's newish in terms of treating MS, whereby a patient undergoes chemotherapy of some sort to wipe out their immune system, their existing immune system, and then that immune system is reset or rebooted by giving them a transplant of their own bone marrow that's been taken out at the start. The whole idea of this is then, if the immune system's causing the problems, let's get rid of it completely, and then let's restock it, but let's restock it or reset it at a point before it knew to attack the central nervous system. In terms of what was discussed, yes, it is certainly an ongoing discussion. Unfortunately, I didn't get to the session about stem cell treatments because it coincided with another session that I had to attend, and I can't remember which one it was at the moment. But knowing that it is an area of interest, I have already started to look through those presentations as a matter of priority. And I think the data is continuing to trend in the way that we've seen with all of the previous studies. Can it be beneficial to people with multiple sclerosis? Yes, it can. In some cases, hugely beneficial. What's the safety looking like? Well, it's getting more and more safe if it's being done in the right areas. And again, we need to be careful about, where this is being done, because there is, unfortunately, still a market of people who are taking advantage, people who are desperate for treatments where it's not being done properly. But the safety profile is certainly improving as we're starting to work out exactly how strong the chemotherapy needs to be. So, we're getting different protocols that are sort of using a moderate strength that obviously decreases the risks. Who is going to benefit most? Again, the narrative is around people early in the disease with really aggressive disease, highly inflammatory disease, are going to be the ones that are going to see the best benefits from it. Are they the only ones that are going to see benefit from it? Not necessarily, but certainly they are the ones at the moment that all of the data seems to suggest is going to get the best outcomes. So that's where it's at. In terms of any really new data in terms of that space, I have to go back, look through this, listen to the talks again to see what's going on. But that's sort of the update. From what I can understand, it's the same. It's the same narrative. Yes, it's beneficial. These are the people who will benefit most. Trials are ongoing. In terms of TISH, no real update from TISH. I know they're going into a new clinical trial. Now, for those of you who are unaware of what TISH is a multiple sclerosis research center in New York, who we featured an interview with a little while ago now, who are looking at using a different type of stem cells called mesenchymal stem cells as a way of being able to treat MS. Now, the difference here is that these stem cells are actually capable of repairing damage. The ones that we just talked about, the AHSCT, that's not about repair, that's just about stopping new damage. So no updates from TISH at the moment, other than going into trying to do a new clinical trial and see whether they can replicate the results that they've already seen in some of their smaller trials. We will keep chasing them up and seeing if we can get some updates from them as soon as they are in a position to provide them in terms of that. So if anyone has any questions on stem cells, please do ask. I know it is a topic of interest. So, please do ask. If you do have any questions on that. All right. Coming back to your question, Leanne, about Ocrevus being in market and if it's matching trial results. So, again, slightly difficult question to answer because I don't know that we have a heap of real-world data out yet in terms of Ocrevus. It's certainly starting to come out. I heard a lot of talks that sort of referenced Ocrevus, but nothing specifically looking into, just checking the notes that I have here. Nothing specifically in terms of real-world data about that. Again, I'll just bring up some other notes that I have. We have seen some evidence that suggests that hand function in people with primary progressive MS may benefit from ocrelizumab. But in terms of real-world data, I certainly didn't see any talks that looked into that in detail. But the question of real-world data versus trial results is really important, and that's something that was a huge topic at the conference, was talking about real-world data, because we do know that trial data tends to be best case scenario. We're picking people for the trial who are most likely to respond positively. We do know that these are all under best case conditions. That may not be the case once we get out into the real world. So now there are lots of studies going on with a lot of the other treatments looking at how does that real world data compare. Can we now compare across multiple treatments to see which one is more effective and what people, can we start to use all of this data to shift to a model of more personalized treatment for people living with MS? And that, I think, is hugely important. Can we actually go to a point where someone can walk in and we can go, okay, based on all of these factors around you, And all of this data that we now have over long term for people all around the world, we can say that this treatment is going to be the best for you. Now, it's never going to be 100%. We're never going to be able to, definitively say you will see benefits on this treatment. I just don't think that's the way multiple sclerosis works. And you guys will know that even better than I do. But getting to a point where we can start treatment with what we think is going to have the best chance of success, I think, and certainly the conversations at the conference suggested, is something that we want to move towards, is something that's achievable, and is something that's really important. Because one of the other conversations around treatment at the conference was, what we need to be doing here is getting people onto an effective treatment as quickly as possible. And we need to be regularly monitoring them on that treatment so that as soon as there's any indication that that treatment's not effective, we can shift over to a new treatment. And I think that's really important. The other really important discussion I had around this, and I put this up on Twitter, I don't know that I put this up on Facebook yet, was that there was certainly an acknowledgement and lots of conversation around the fact that the decisions around treatment need to include a hugely positive and interactive discussion between the neurologist, the person living with MS, and the people close to them. That everyone needs to be involved in that decision, and it needs to take into account everyone's viewpoints, and that there needs to be an environment created in these situations where everyone feels comfortable discussing it and everyone gets their voice heard. Now, again, from things that we've heard on MS Translate, we know that that's not necessarily always been the case for everyone. And so I think that, I think that again, is a positive discussion that's being had. So, in terms of real world data for Ocrevus, and I know that you also asked about, if people have tried Ocrevus and have progressed, what's the next step? I don't have an answer to that question at this stage. If there are people who are watching, who have some experience of being on Ocrevus, have seen, have progressed, or had conversations about what would happen if that was the case, have seen benefits, we'd love to hear from you. But yeah, I don't know that we've quite had it long enough yet to get that. I do need, as I said, I need to go back and I'm still looking through all of the data that was presented. So if I do see anything about that, I will provide an update. But at the moment, it's not something that I've hugely seen. I guess the main thing that we're seeing with Ocrevus is just that it's not really being made readily available for people with primary progressive MS, which was what all the hype was around when Ocrevus was first released, was that this was the first treatment for people with primary progressive MS. Unfortunately, regulatory bodies aren't really making it funded, which obviously makes it hugely difficult to access. So, that's another topic of conversation that I guess we can have if people are interested. Hi, Karen. Hi, Fran. Thank you for joining. Thank you for watching. Don't worry if you missed the start of the conversation. As I mentioned to a comment on yesterday's post, the entire video gets published to our Facebook page once this is concluded. So if you have missed anything and want to watch it back, feel free. I don't know, Karen. Anyone else that's watching, can someone please just put a comment? Oh, no, I'm back. Excellent. Good. I'm just going to assume that you muted me briefly because you got sick of my voice, and after an hour and 10 minutes, I can't hugely blame you. And welcome to Kylie. Kylie again, someone who's Kylie, Karen, have all been regular members on MS Translate live videos and always come up with good comments. So thank you for watching again. Thanks for being part of the conversation. So Kathy, was VR talked about? I haven't read much about this, but would be really interested to hear about it. So in terms of ECTRIMS, no, I didn't see any talks on it. I didn't see it mentioned in the scientific program in terms of the oral presentations. There was thousands of posters presented. I haven't looked through all of them yet. So there may have been a poster on it, but I'm not sure. It certainly hasn't something that I've come across. But there is something going on in that space. I am hearing about research that's happening in it. It's something that we're looking to feature in the future. We're talking to some researchers who are doing some work in that area that we hope to be able to feature maybe early in the new year. So can't say too much more about that at the moment. But yeah, it is an area. It is, as you would have seen, I posted something about it the other day. There have been small studies. There is more going on in that space, and yeah, we will look to feature it in the next little while. All right, so going through the list of things that I had to talk about. I've talked about real-world data. How do we go from clinical trials to what's actually happening when treatments come out to the population, and how do we use that data to better optimize treatment outcomes for people living with MS. We've talked about that. We've talked about environmental risk factors, things like body mass index, smoking, infections, diet. Not only how can they increase your risk of developing MS, but importantly, do they have any impact on progression? So all of that's happened as well. We've talked about myelin repair and the important role it has to play in terms of being the next stage in terms of multiple sclerosis treatments, and we will have an interview with Dr. Ari Green from the University of California, San Francisco, appearing on MS Translate in the near future. We've talked about new information about the immune system, specifically in terms of the roles of B cells and exactly how they're involved in multiple sclerosis. And again, we'll have an interview with Professor Roland Martin from the University of Zurich, appearing on MS Translate in the near future as well, who led that study. We've talked about the gut microbiome and the role it might be playing in multiple sclerosis, and we've already featured an interview with Professor Helen Tremlett from the University of British Columbia on MS Translate, and the link to the YouTube version of that is available in the comments under this video. We have talked about symptom treatments and how potentially we are shifting now towards not just having treatments that treat the disease, but also treatments that can help manage symptoms. Hugely important, specifically in terms of symptoms like fatigue and depression. And we've got an interview coming up on MS Translate with Professor Anthony Feinstein about this. What else have we talked about? We've talked about Ocrevus and the role that it may be playing in real-world data. We've talked about diets. Is that everything? We've talked a little bit about virtual reality research and how that may be involved. And I think that's a good summary of what we've talked about so far. So, continuing on, we've just got a couple of questions that were submitted still from the community to go through. Feel free to drop any more questions. Considering we've been going for an hour and 15 minutes, I'm guessing everyone's getting quite sick of me, so I will try and wrap up in the near future. Let's try and keep it to about an hour and a half, but questions come through, as always, I will make sure that I answer them. But we will look to do these, as I always say, we will look to do these more often. As long as there's an interest for me to keep doing them, I will keep doing them because I do enjoy doing them. So, a couple of other questions that we got. Fran, seeing that Fran is now watching, Fran's question was around, there been studies looking at the incidence of fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, and multiple sclerosis within families. Unfortunately, my short answer to this is not really that I've seen. Certainly there have been discussions around things like chronic fatigue syndrome and multiple sclerosis in terms of should we be looking to see what similarities there are, because a lot of the major symptoms are similar. haven't really seen anything published in terms of actually finding anything out about that. Though I do know that there is research going on in that space. We're in contact with the researchers who are doing that. And we will look to provide an interview with them as soon as they've got their findings and they've got them published. So it is something that I know is happening. We are actually already in conversations with them. So that will happen. In terms of fibromyalgia, nothing in terms of how it runs through families that I've seen. I can do a more in-depth search of this. Certainly there's been a couple of small studies that have looked at, is fibromyalgia more common in people with MS than in the population? And those small studies have shown that yes, that's the case, that it can be a comorbidity. But in terms of, is there a link between families all sort of experiencing one or more of these different conditions? I haven't seen that study published. It's certainly an interesting question. If anyone else has any anecdotal evidence that they want to share about that, please feel free to drop those comments on. But yeah, my simple answer to that question is just that I haven't seen it. And then in terms of the last question, Cindy asked a question about research into blockages in internal jugular veins. It wasn't something that was discussed at the conference that I saw. Again, certainly not in any of the oral presentations that I was aware of. Whether it was in some of those posters, again, I haven't been able to look through all of them. So certainly potentially there was something there. In terms of the oral presentations, one presentation that unfortunately I only heard the end of, but had people sort of queuing outside to watch it on TV screens because the theatre was full, was an update on the role of the blood-brain barrier and what we know about the blood-brain barrier in terms of multiple sclerosis, in terms of how that vasculature and the vascular system around that, may be involved. So that's something I will definitely go back and listen to that presentation and provide an update on that as soon as I have it. But yeah, in terms of that specific question, nothing that I saw at the conference in terms of that. So those were all the questions that we had submitted previously. There's two other things that I want to talk about in terms of conference content. But before I get to that, another question from MS Auckland. Haven't mentioned meditation as a lifestyle treatment. Any research happening here? Yeah, I mean, certainly there is lots of research in terms of that, in terms of mindfulness and wellness, and the roles that they can be playing in MS. In terms of at the conference, I do believe there was an oral presentation on it that I didn't catch, but it is on my list of things to read. But certainly where we are starting to see some evidence around that. I know that the neuroepidemiology group has some evidence regarding the use of meditation and the benefits that may have for people living with MS. But yeah, there is certainly a lot of evidence being generated regarding that. It is an area of interest, again, obviously because it's something that people can control and it's something that people can apply to their daily lives. So it is an area, it's something that we're monitoring. We do post on wellness and mindfulness when we do see research published on it. So it is something that we'll continue to monitor. But I didn't catch any of the updates from the conference in terms of that. So in terms of a couple of other things from the conference, again, feel free to drop questions as I keep talking. Any last questions that you might have, because I'm down to my last 2 dot points of things that I want to talk about. So any last questions, feel free to post them as we keep going. So there was 2. One of the highlights, or the late breaking news at the conference, and one of the things that everyone at the conference was really excited about, was the release of results of the MS SMART trial. Now, the MS SMART trial was looking at looking at 3 different treatments in terms of whether or not they can provide neuroprotection for people living with secondary progressive MS or SPMS. Now, obviously, this is an area of huge importance because currently, there's not many effective treatments for people living with SPMS. What was special about this trial was the fact that they were actually able to trial 3 different compounds at once. So, as you would probably be aware, with most clinical trials that we talk about, we have 1 treatment, 1 placebo. We have a treatment group and a placebo group. What they did in this was that they had 3 different treatment groups and a placebo group. And this is actually really important. So, to go to the findings of the study, there was 2 findings. Disappointingly, they found that none of the treatments were effective. None of the treatments met any of the goals of the study. So obviously that was quite disappointing. But what they did find was that the trial design was very successful. Now, while obviously we would prefer to get positive results, the fact that we now have seen an ability to test multiple different treatments at once is really going to be able to accelerate our way of doing this in the future. And that's important, especially when we're trying to find as many different options as possible. That the successful trial design is exciting. And so hopefully that's something that we see more and more of in the future. So that was one that I wanted to talk about. The other one that I wanted to talk about, the other area, because it is something, again, that we know is of huge interest to the community, is talking about medicinal cannabis. So there was a session on that at the conference. There were 2 studies in particular that were talked about that I'll just share the results of. So the first one was essentially looking at long-term effects and seeing, just really assessing the safety and seeing whether there was any long-term negative effects of this in people living with multiple sclerosis. And this was all using the THC CBD spray, which you may know as Sativex. So they did a study where people were using this daily for 48 weeks, and they saw that compared to placebo, there was no cognitive decline witnessed, and there was no mood changes observed in the people who were on the Sativex. So from this, the outcome was that certainly across the long-term use, obviously long-term only out to just almost a year, so we don't have the data beyond that, but they didn't see cognitive decline or mood changes as being a side effect of this in people with MS. There was another study then they presented results on the use of this spray as a potential add-on to treat spasticity. So in people living with MS who have hard to deal with spasticity, they looked at, was there any benefit to having their current spasticity treatment plus Sativex versus just having the spasticity treatment that they were on. And what they found was that in the group that also had the spray, the THC CBD spray, as an add-on therapy, they found that there was clinically relevant improvement of spasticity in that group. So, this is obviously an ongoing discussion around the world in terms of the use of medicinal cannabis for people with a variety of medical conditions, including MS. We're now starting to get some really solid evidence for the use of this, at least in terms of the treatment of spasticity. I think we will see more and more about that. Those were the main studies that I saw covered at ECTRIMS. I think obviously as more studies come out on this, we'll continue to highlight them, but I thought that was an important one that people might want to hear about. So that was the other thing to talk about. So that covers everything that I had that I wanted to talk about at this stage. There was so many different talks, lots of exciting research. I could talk and talk and talk about all of the things that I witnessed there. But we have to draw the line somewhere. I'll have opportunities to do this and more. If you are someone who's watching, especially I guess in Australia, but certainly around the world with technology, and you're part of a support group, and you do want me to come and talk to the group about this, about ECTRIMS and all the research that I heard, feel free. I have one coming up that I'm excited to be going and doing out in the Macedon Ranges. Love catching up with that group. So certainly if you are interested in having me come along and present either in person or virtually via Skype or whatever it is, Facebook Live, let me know. Definitely happy to do that. I want to get as much information out about what I heard at the conference as possible, because it was a fantastic experience. Loved every minute of it. It was great to be part of it and to be able to be in the room with all of these leading researchers from around the world, to get the opportunity to have a chat with them and also record that chat to be able to present to you guys. And I'm really excited about the interviews that we still have to share. They will be coming soon. I hope you guys are really excited about them. As a favor, when those interviews go up, as I always say, what's really important is that if you like the content that we're producing, if you can like, comment, and share on that content, just so as many people can get access to it as possible. That means as many people in our community are aware of it, as many people in your community are aware of it, and it also helps us convince other researchers to come on board and do interviews. If they can see that there's an interest from the community in it, then they're going to be more likely to agree to participate in those interviews. We can give you more content. So that's just the last thing. If you can just always, with our stuff that comes out, but especially those times when we do get researchers involved, it's really important to highlight to them that you're interested in it, that you value their time, that they take to sit and talk about their research. So that's my sort of last point on that. So if there are no further questions, which it looks like they're not, we're coming right up to an hour and a half, so that ties in nicely. If you've been watching this whole time, thank you very much for sticking with me and listening to me through all of this. It's much appreciated. For everyone that joined in during it, that dropped in comments, that just watched, that put in questions from previous pages, from previous posts, thank you again. I come back from Europe invigorated, excited about everything that's happening in the multiple sclerosis research space, but more so than ever committed to continuing to update you guys and engage you on what's going in that research space, continue to provide you with the most accurate, up-to-date information, get as many researchers on board to talk to you directly as possible. What we are doing is great. We're doing it together, and we are getting more and more researchers who want to participate in this, because we've created such a great environment, and you guys are part of that. So, I'm excited. I'm excited about what's coming up. I'm excited to share the interviews with you. Excited to continue to do this as we're getting close to another year being over. But it's been a fantastic year. We'll make sure that we do another Facebook Live video before 2018 ends. But I'm already looking forward to what we're going to be doing in 2019. Trust me when I say it's going to be even bigger and better things. Thank you for being part of this. Thank you for sharing it with me. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to sit here and talk to you about stuff. I hope you're as enthusiastic about it all as I am. But for now, enjoy your evenings. If you're in our part of the world, if you're in other parts of the world and are just waking up, welcome, have a great day. And I look forward to talking to you all again in the very near future. Thanks, everyone.